Today we've got an EVGA RTX 2070 Super that's definitely seen better days. I picked this up in a local Facebook Marketplace deal, and as you can see from the griminess and the dust on this thing, it definitely needs a deep clean. So the first step in disassembly is to remove all the screws from the back plate, along with the 4 screws that are holding the heatsink onto the GPU. So the autofocus went a little nuts on this video. My apologies in advance for that. And I've sped this up a little bit just to go through the process a little quicker. There are a lot of screws on the back of this card holding the back plate in place, so I'm definitely going to keep track of those to make sure I have everything together. Can't forget about the screws on the I/O plate, so we'll go ahead and remove those and get that taken off as well. And I struggled a little bit to get the cooler off of the GPU itself, but eventually we pop that off and you can see the thermal paste. So the cooler comes off as one big piece. We'll go ahead and set that to the side. So we have our back plate and our mid plate that we need to remove from the GPU board as well. There's some pretty thick thermal pads on the back of the GPU, so we'll get those pulled off, place them on the back plate, and then we'll replace them with fresh new thermal pads. Next, we'll remove the mid plate from the GPU itself, and there'll be another set of thermal pads under this that we'll have to replace as well. Next, we'll use 75% alcohol wipes to just wipe down the GPU itself. And I'm not too concerned with the high water content in these wipes because we're going to use some other cleaners later on in the video to get this thing fully cleaned up. Next, I'm using a soft nylon brush just to loosen up any additional dirt and dust. Next, we'll tackle the heatsink assembly. Start by cleaning off the thermal paste and brushing this down as well to loosen up any additional dust. Now, to make sure this is fully clean, we need to remove the plastic shroud from the heatsink itself. So we're going to do that next. After removing this piece, you can definitely see that dusty, grimy buildup, so we need to get that fully cleaned. The next step is to remove both of these fans from the heatsink itself. There are 3 Phillips screws holding this on. If you take your time, you just get between the blades, loosen those up, and the fans come right off. With the fans loosened, we can now use our brush to brush down the heatsink itself to get all that dust in between the fins. There's also this RGB LED strip that's held on with one screw and a little bit of adhesive. We're going to go ahead and loosen that so we can take that off. After using the brush on the heatsink itself to get the dust between the fins, you can see all that build up on the mat. We're just going to clean that up a little bit before moving further. Next, we need to tackle the built-up grime on the fan blades. At first, I was going to use these Q-tips with 99% isopropyl alcohol, but ended up using these 75% alcohol wipes dipped in the 99% isopropyl alcohol just to give it a little bit more strength to remove this stuff. As you can see, once I used that method, it came off pretty quick. I'm taking my time on each fan blade just to make sure it's fully cleaned. You may have to do this a couple of times. Here's a better look at that dirt and grime that got soaked into the alcohol wipe. You can definitely see why I'm wearing gloves. Next, we'll do the same thing to the other fan, taking our time, using the alcohol wipe dipped in 99% isopropyl alcohol, just to get these fully cleaned up. Next on the list, we're going to wipe down the plastic shroud. Next, we're going to use my ultrasonic cleaner to clean the heatsink, the fans, the plastic shroud, and the I/O backplate. I'm using a combination of water, some dish soap, a little bit of 99% isopropyl alcohol, and we'll let that run at a high heat for about 20 to 25 minutes. While that is running, I'm going to use this WD-40 contact cleaner to clean off the PCB itself. Next, I'm using my data vac to blow off any excess cleaner and to dry it up a little quicker. While the ultrasonic cleaner is running, I'm taking the parts out, scrubbing them down a little bit just to give it a better chance of removing that dirt and grime. Once that's done, I'm going to dry these parts using the data vac, along with pouring some isopropyl alcohol on them and using contact cleaner as well, just to make sure there's no water and no moisture buildup. And for the fans, I want to use this contact cleaner to really get in there to make sure there's no water built up around the bearings. Here's the aftermath of using the ultrasonic cleaner. Once everything is dry, we take it back inside. And as you can see, these little white pieces actually came out of the plastic shroud, but the little rubber grommets in them are yellowed. There's not a lot I can do about that. but we did get this as clean as we possibly could. There's a night and day difference on this plastic shroud. You can actually see through it now, and it's fully clean. Next, we point our attention to the mid plate and the back plate and replacing these thermal pads. I use these calipers to measure the size of the thermal pads, as they can all be different sizes ranging from 0.5 millimeters up to 3 millimeters. So you definitely want to cut and measure exactly the same size thermal pads just so you don't have any clearance issues or any overheating issues when you reassemble the GPU. I purchased a kit online of multiple sizes just so I have a variety for what I need. These are actually two different kits that I put together from other projects, and they perform exactly the same, so even though some are blue and some are gray, they're doing the same function. While I have the thermal pads removed, I'm just going to wipe down this mid plate with an alcohol wipe. There's also this section of the mid plate that has screws in it, so I wanted to remove those and take that off just to make sure there wasn't any dirt or grime built up under that. Next, you can see I'm lining up the old thermal pads on top of the new ones and then cutting around that to get the same size. This is not a perfect science. The cuts don't have to be exactly precise. As long as you're covering the components on the GPU itself, you should be absolutely fine. Once I have all those cut out in the right sizes, I put them back on the mid plate and we put that on the GPU itself. What I'm doing now is I'm looking through the mid plate to make sure there's not any large gaps between the thermal pads and the components on the GPU, just to make sure I have the right sizes and everything is in place. On one of these, I actually did make a mistake, so I'm cutting a new thermal pad from the correct size and getting that back in place. Next, we're focusing on the thermal pads on the backplate itself to get those cut out and replaced. It's always good to get pictures or video when you're doing this process, just so you can kind of trace your steps and make sure you have everything where it needs to be. These all appear to be the same size, but I'm measuring them just in case to make sure. After cutting those out as well, you can see I have them on the back plate. They're definitely not perfect. They're a little lopsided, but they absolutely will get the job done. Again, as long as they're covering those components, that's all you're worried about. Next step, we're going to get the fan screwed back into the cooler. This is a lot harder than removing the fans, but if you take your time, you can definitely get it done. Next, we're going to get these white pieces snapped back into the plastic shroud itself, and then we'll get that screwed down to the cooler. Next step, we're making sure the GPU die is clean so we can apply new thermal paste. And it may look like I'm using way too much thermal paste here, but I'm actually going to smear it around with my glove and remove any excess, just to make sure we have good coverage. It was difficult to get on camera, but there's a connector that plugs the cooler into the GPU board itself, so I made sure to do that. Next, we're going to get the back plate and the I/O shield installed. Next, we're getting the GPU cooler screwed back onto the GPU, along with the back plate. Now that we've got it fully reassembled, the next step is to test it in FurMark to make sure the GPU is functioning as it should. I've got my makeshift test bench here, and running FurMark on the GPU, you can see the core temp, hotspot temp, and VRAM temps are under 80 degrees. This EVGA GeForce RTX 2070 Super is ready to go. Make sure to subscribe and like, and let me know in the comments what type of videos you want to see.